It's good to see everyone out this evening for our Wednesday Bible study. We come to the last lesson in the book of Ezekiel. And I want us to kind of start where we were off last time of looking at this chart. I made one that maybe we could see it better. But when you put together all of the division of how the people were going to dwell in the land, we begin to see it's kind of follows this pattern. And I want us to notice in this lesson, when we speak about how people look at Ezekiel, Mason spoke to that, not with about premillennialists and all that sort of thing, but the people are Reformed Calvinists. They look at Ezekiel to say God's going to put miraculously a new spirit in you. And we look at the context says, well, he changes their spirit through the punishment of having to be exiled. And it's all those connected that way. The premillennialists are looking at this, what we're studying about the temple. We've gone into a little detail about that. Now we're looking at how they will divide the land. And we're going to examine that. But the idea of the temple, one of the things that is set forth as we see, and we're able to make this connection because we see the glory of God leaving in Ezekiel 10, 8 through 10. He's leaving there because Ezekiel says, I see all the ungodliness there. There were men facing the east in the temple and they're worshiping the sun, not God. And therefore they were going off into their idolatry and going into their punishment. Well, this particular temple, you got the temple in Jerusalem. You're going to have Zerubbabel's temple when they come back from captivity. You got Herod updating that temple. This temple has never been built yet, nor I don't believe it ever will. Remember, we're looking at on top of a mountain, and we're seeing the great dimensions of this city and the people that dwell there. That says, it's not indicate the idea, well, this is going to be necessarily in Jerusalem. It's on a mountain when he sees what it is. But what we see here is applied to Jerusalem. It's a conceptual concept, a concept of God's holiness being restored to the hearts of the people. And we see a prince coming into the city. He's never able to enter into the holy place. He does his sacrifices for the people, but he does them outside the gate of the outer wall. And the gates are open, but only glory of Jehovah has entered there too. The gates are shut, but on the new moon and the Sabbath, we'll find the prince comes and he gets about close to the outside door. He offers the sacrifices. He cares for the people. And we've seen passages last time where the idea of the kings abusing their power, priests abusing their place, and the kings were getting the property from the people. Not going to happen with this division, does it? Does the prince have his own land? Is it separated from the tribes? There is a city. Of course, I have two squares there because it was 4 square, but that was the city of Jerusalem. It has its place. And no more will they be taking the land of the people, because a holy, righteous character of God's people, this is the concept that's taking place. And Ezekiel talks about that. Oh, you'll be able to give your land to the prince, to his inheritance. But if he gives that to the people, he'll come back at the Feast of Jubilee, where every 7 years everything went back to the owner. And that's going to be the righteous way of obeying God's law. We've spoken about the details of the measurements, and we've seen already in Ezekiel that was a measurement of the fact that in connection with they had disobeyed what God's specific commandments were regarding how they should live. Now they're going to follow the pattern. The pattern is connected with their being punished for their sins. Concepts of holiness, righteousness, righteous living is being set forth. We spoke about last time that just the idea of where the people will be situated. Who's further from the temple? Dan? Asher? And we see Gad at the bottom. And what we begin to realize, we see, why isn't this divided 6 and 6? 7 and 5, that's just not, wow, 6 up here, 6 here, you got 12 tribes. Well, you got 2 tribes of Joseph mentioned here because the Levites have their special place. They're not going to have their land. God's going to take care of them through the sacrifices. But Dan, Asher, and Gad were all given birth by who? Not Leah and Rachel. They're concubines. Their mothers were the concubine. And whether that is the point being made, that's something that's true about each one of them. Look at Genesis, the 30th chapter. And you say, well, God allowed this, but it was because not trusting in God. She left off childbearing, and here I'll just give my handmaid to you. Genesis, the 30th chapter, and verse 4, says she gave him Bilhah, her handmaid, to wife, and Jacob went unto her. And Bilhah conceived and bare Jacob. And Rachel said, God hath judged me and hath heard my voice and hath given me a son. Therefore call his name what? Dan. Concubine, maid, let's do that. Verse 9 and 10. When Leah saw that she had left off bearing, she took Zilpah, her handmaid, and gave her to Jacob to wife. And Zilpah, Leah's handmaid, bare Jacob a son. And Leah said, fortunate, she called his name Gad. Verse 13, Leah said, happy am I, for the daughters will call me happy, and she called his name Asher. And those were the ones, of course, Joseph, the tribes of Joseph, Manasseh and Ephraim, he gets a double portion. But those that are further away from God's holiness in the temple, whether that had anything to do with this conception of holiness, I think is something to consider. Because that's not the way that we think they ought to be situated when we look at dividing up the land. But this is what was key there. And you have the Levites having their special place. There's the property of the prince. He has his own place. What's in the center of all of this? Guarded by all the tribes on the outside. And you got part of the city property, and you got the Levites property, and you have the priest in that inner court and around the temple. It's kind of center, isn't it? It's looked upon as being, this is going to be the center, and you entered that through the east gate, and God's glory has already entered into it. We've come to these last chapters of Ezekiel. The door of the gate shut. It's opened every Sabbath day. It's open every first of the month, and the sacrifices that they give. But we begin to realize that here is the concept of holiness, and we have a concept of the prince. That's got to be Jesus Christ. Well, hold on. It could be in this concept the king. That indeed, that's not Jesus. And we look at it in its context. He can't go into the holy place. Jesus can't in the millennium or whenever down the future. Well, yeah, it's the prince, and that's true. But when we begin to see the prince that's spoken about of being of the tribe of Judah are going to be setting forth, that's definitely talking about Jesus Christ. And we've seen that. He will make a covenant of peace. He will be a prince forever. He will, all the characteristics of the prince that is to come, concept is future glory, that would be connected with the establishment of the church. New covenant connected with the church. Church didn't produce it. It's not the new covenant church, but it's a covenant of promise where indeed it's interesting. Inside this temple in the most holy place is empty. Find me a piece of furniture in the most holy place in Ezekiel. It's not there. In the holy place, there's a little altar. It's called a table here in Ezekiel. And it's a table, and you say, well, that's pretty close to the idea. Standing before Jehovah, it's in the holy place. It may have been right before the veil, like the altar of incense. If it's true, it's larger than the altar of incense. Remember all the steps coming from the outside, going in and into the higher court and into the temple itself, always stepping up, higher, elevated, God's glory, coming close to that. But there's nothing in the most holy place except the glory of God that's entered. No Ark of the Covenant, no cherubim. And that's the way the millennium is going to be. I wonder if it is empty. How do you have God's glory returning, and he doesn't need a piece of furniture to get you strong to go out and do the battle for God? And he feels it. That's where his throne is. And there's no furniture to set that forth. And the river of life is coming from the throne. That's a concept that from the very throne of God from heaven is the river that gives life. And we read in the scripture where Zechariah speaks about a river. We find other prophets speaking about a river of life. It's a concept that always giving good things. Garden of Eden had a bunch of rivers. God blessed them. It's God's blessing flowing. And it goes out and, it's going straight into the Dead Sea and out to the other sea, the Persian. Some have it going back over and going into the Mediterranean. I don't know how it ended up. But the concept was God's glory is there and his goodness is there with a river of life. And the idea, this is the concept of what Ezekiel has for the people. And sometimes he hits the prince way down the road, who Jesus is. But in this part, Prince doesn't get closer than the gates. Doesn't get closer. And I think, is that really going to be the Prince that's Jesus Christ? In earlier chapters, he's indeed eternal, and he's never going to be the one that's going to be ever giving that up. He's going to be enjoying that blessing forevermore. Notice, I was trying to think of a passage. That's enough said on that. So what I'm saying is that we say, well, that's you're just taking it symbolically because you can't handle literal application of Scripture. And Ezekiel gave you all these specific examples and specified things going to be literally done that way. And that's the way it's going to be. Well, wonder if we're looking at it that it wasn't literally going to be there, and we're going to hit on that tonight some more, about the land promise and about the sacrifices being offered. How does that fit with the great plan of God? But why don't we just want to look at here that when we think about, it's foreseeing the time, it's time of the church, yes. But this temple is a concept of the people, how they're going to turn back to God and honor a holy God. And that's the point. He makes the point sometime in the prince that was to come. He specifies it. He'll set forth a covenant of peace. He will be involved in coming from David. And he will be prince forever. Very definitely foreseeing the coming of Christ. But it's not foreseeing the coming of Christ for this temple. Because if he's the prince, he's not getting in. Zadok the Levites are the one offering the sacrifice. He can't even, he has to offer, he presents the sacrifice for the people, but he can't get in. Can't get in the holy place. Jesus? The millennium? And Jesus came and fulfilled that because he wouldn't fulfill this prophecy, this prince, and he has to go out where he came in. He's limited because the kings weren't being faithful. And in this concept that Ezekiel is seeing, this is what the prince should be. But I'm not going to let all the priests offer the sacrifices just of Zadok. And this prince isn't going to be able to get in other than the gates are open, but he can't come in. He could say, here's the sacrifices, Zadok, them going to do it. But he can't get closer to the temple because they violated that. The other priests turned away from God. He wanted them to see, your prince ought to be your leader. Yeah, he's going to respect the holiness of God. He's not going to tread on it. Because the king, their rulers had failed them. Their priests had failed them. That's the concept of holiness that God is wanting them to see in this imagery that he's setting forth with the details of the temple, and this is the dividing of the land that we are able to see. Now tonight, did anybody draw that exactly that way? You were told to do that. Not like this. And that may not be helpful of the concept, because that city property, I'm not saying that there were 2 square blocks for that. It's just the whole city of Jerusalem, but it was perfectly square. There are and that whole section, just where the section of the temple is. But holiness of God and his glory is entered in. The first chapter 8 to 10, his holiness left, his glory left. And all that wonderful chariot. It went back to Babylon. He's come now, and he's now sees this glory, but he sees the glory of God entering into this temple, into this divine land. So there's a land vision among his people. There's their worship side, and he gives these details. So I want to look at the next question. And this is the question number 8. This is how we sum up the chapter of the book. If these chapters describe the glorious millennium, it's definitely that. This temple hadn't been built yet. It's going to be built in the millennium. Is their concept. And what does the word millennium mean? 1,000 years. And that takes you to Revelation. He's going to rule 1,000 years. And that's when he's going to come back and set up his kingdom, and it's going to look like this temple. And so I'm just saying, if that's the case, what we've read about the temple, what we've read in these last 40 through 48, it says, show from Scripture that its makeup is but a dark shadow of what we have now. How would you approach that? Now, the key word is shadow. Anything come to mind? What you've read in Ezekiel 40 through 48, the Levite priest of Zadok, the prince. Have you noticed anything about that set forth the idea of, if that's going to happen in the 1,000-year reign of Christ, how does that compare, really contrast, with the concept of what God said was a shadow of the things to come? How would you put that together? Sacrifices. What sacrifices? Oh, we're going to sing songs of praise in our heart, make melody in our heart. Is that the sacrifices we're offering in these chapters? I see burnt offerings. I see lambs. I see meal offerings. And so I want us to notice in that concept that we're indeed about the temple worship. So let's notice in Ezekiel 40, did anybody answer that? I don't want to answer it for you. I'm just assuming that hopefully you have something like this in your mind you thought about. But you can take this. All right, I'm going to take this literally. And so if it's literally, I want to learn it actually. But if you want to take literal point, let's just see what we're talking about. Ezekiel 44:15. But the priests, the Levites, the son of Zadok, that kept the charge of my sanctuary when the children of Israel went astray from me. See, when they went astray from me, the other priests didn't do that. He's punishing them. He's not punishing them. They're being punished in Babylon. But the point is, I'm trying to show you that indeed they're going to be one offering the sacrifices because you all forsook that. Literally so. Well, it's going to be. It's be the tribe of Zadok. And he says, "They shall come near to me to minister." The king's not getting that close. And the prince, and they shall stand before me to offer to me the fat and the blood. What's that in the Old Testament? The fat and the blood. Going to happen in the millennium. Fat and the blood. What's that? You don't eat the blood because that's the life of the sacrifice, and that's always, you're not going to eat that, people. But the fat was that special part. That was the part that belonged to God, not you and me. Not of sacrifices. The burnt offerings we could partake of some of these sacrifices, but the fat and the blood was offered unto God. Sprinkled before God, offered on the altar. They're offering their sacrifice to God. And you say, well, okay, that's going to happen in the millennium. If that's the case, what does it say about the sacrifice of Jesus? And what the New Testament says is a part of that. Well, let's go chapters over. Chapter 46, verse 4. Verse 20, drop back verse 21. The prince shall enter by the way of the porch of the gate without, and shall stand by the porch of the gate, a post of the gate. And the priest shall prepare his burnt offering. Well, the prince came off. Jesus was prophet, priest, and king. Now, could it be the concept of the prince has its context? And when he spoke about what's going to happen clearly in the future with Jesus fulfilling every point, how does this happen? So they shall prepare a burnt offering, because that's who's going to do it, and his peace offerings. And he shall worship at the threshold. Why can't I come in the inner court? I'm a priest. I'm a prince. Now the king violated his place, his place. And this is the imagery that is setting forth. And he shall go forth, but the gate shall not be shut until the evening. The people of the land shall worship at the door of that gate before Jehovah on the Sabbaths and on the new moons. So we're going back to feast days, aren't we? In the millennium, that's what these chapters are supposed to be about. And they're talking about the glory of God, and they're showing them that indeed here's the concepts that we have in light of your ungodliness, and the prince and the priest are not measuring up, but now they are. They know they can go so far, and they've got to honor the holiness of God. The burnt offering, he says, that the prince shall offer unto Jehovah shall be on the Sabbath day. So we're keeping the Sabbath day holy in the millennium. Oh yes, we're going to establish it all. And lambs without blemish. Who was that? The lamb without blemish. He came, and then we go 5 steps backward into the shadow. He's the real thing. The antitype. And what was striking against the antitype, which is Christ, was indeed all the burnt offerings and all of these things, and the law was a shadow of the things to come. It was kicking against what he had in mind to begin with. But now in the millennium, we go back into the shadow. I don't see God ever doing that. And it's a copy of the things that are more important that are going to come. That's the whole concept of a temple anyway. There's not going to be any temple in heaven, because God's there and we're there before him. But we see that indeed there's offering this blemish of ram and so forth. So these things, let's notice in the New Testament how this is I think a problem that I would like somebody to have to address, that holding these things. We're going back to Mr. Armstrong back in the early days. He said we're going back and we're going to be keeping all these days holy when the Lord comes back again. We're going back to the Old Testament. Here's the reason why. He's looking at these things, and we're going to have to accept that literally, forgetting the type of literature we're looking at. But this is what we're going to have to face. Hebrews 8 and verse 5 talks about the law. He says, and he speaks in verse 4, now if we were on the earth, or if he were on the earth, he would not be a priest at all, seeing that there was those who offer the gifts according to the law. That would be of the tribe of Levite and priest, who serve that which is a copy and shadow of the heavenly things, as Moses is warned of God when he's about to make the tabernacle, for see that thou make all things according to the pattern that was showed thee in the mount. It's just a shadow. It's just a copy. How can you have a copy if you don't have something actual? How can you have a shadow if there's not something to cast it? Jesus hadn't come yet. New covenant hadn't established yet in the Old Testament. In the mind of God, he's there. And my whole plan is hitting off of that. That's why baptism is an antitype. Or the flood was an antitype. And baptism is striking against the idea of what was there was the waters. And baptism was in the place of God to begin with, where I was looking forward to. And so how do you then erase that and place the things that were just a copy? I would think we're not making progress. I want the real thing. Jesus Christ is the real thing. Look at Hebrews the 10th chapter in verse 8. Saying above, sacrifices and offerings and whole burnt offerings and sacrifices for sin, thou wouldest not. Neither had pleasure therein, which are offered according to the law. Then hath he said, Lo, I am come to do thy will. He taketh away the first, they may establish the second, and be replaced by the first in the millennium. Praise God. Really? Does that make sense to you? He may establish the second, and that's nothing coming after it, by which will we have been sanctified through the offering of the body of Christ, how many times? Once for all. So you're going to let burnt offerings now do it for you? What word in God's word is that going to be? Well, that ram's now going to save you. Well, Jesus is supposed to do it once for all. No, we're coming back. This is what God said. Literally, this is going to be so. And every priest indeed standeth day by day, ministering and offering oftentimes the same sacrifices, which can never take away sins. But when he had offered one sacrifice for sins forever, he sat down the right hand of God, henceforth expecting till his enemies be made the footstool of his feet. When will that be? New Testament tells us it's a resurrection. What's the last enemy going to be destroyed? Death. That's still in the future. And we're never taking, let's go back under the shadow. Let's go back under the copy. Let's go back under a law that never could make you righteous. Let's go back under the sacrifice, of all things, the sacrifices. You can talk about the Sabbath days. What did Colossians, the 2nd chapter, tell us about those days of connected with the law? Ezekiel's connected with the law because they didn't serve God according to that pattern. And he said, this is what I visualize for a righteous people. In the context, you're going through your punishment in Babylon. You're not coming back yet. Yeah, they come back and establish a temple, but it doesn't look like this one. That's why people say, well, that's the millennium. And they go there. But there's the consequences of that. Look at Colossians, the 2nd chapter. Here's our baptism, connected with the death and the resurrection of Christ. With that happening, verse 14, having blotted out the bond written in ordinances that was against us. What was the bond written in ordinances that was against us? The law of Moses, written law. How is it against us? It was holy, righteous, good. We didn't live up to it. It's our weakness of the flesh, not God's eternal plan that's kind of faltered. No, it's perfect. But he wasn't ever going to justify us by that. Going to be justified by the blood of Christ. And he had taken it out of the way, nailing it to the cross. Now, what does verse 16 say? Here's a therefore. When you see a therefore, you go back and look what preceded it. Therefore, what? Well, he put to death the bond written in his ordinances. He struck it out of the way, and by him be put to death. So let no man judge you, therefore, in meat, or drink, or respect to a feast day or a new moon. Well, we're going back under it in the millennium, I guess. Something happened. Did we not forget? We forget the real thing, that all the things were a shadow and a copy of? Who has the original? It's always been set. And God's plan is moving it toward that. He's not going to come back. It's a shadow of the things to come, but the body, where everything takes its copy from, the body is Christ. That's not the church. It's the body is Christ. It's a sense of, indeed, he's the one in which is the substance. Here's just a copy. Here's just a shadow that we're talking about. So if that's the case, then we're going to be under the millennial reign of Christ. He's going to get people to go back under the laws of Judah and all the sacrifices. And maybe he said, we're going to get it right now. So Jesus is going to have rams and things. What's it looking forward to? That's what all these things were done. God didn't make mistakes. And why did he plan sacrifices all these years and bring a people that were trained in that so they could be prepared for the Lamb of God to take it away the sin of the world? And to erase that and put in its place shadows and copies, I don't think that's going to be a very good millennium for Jesus. And I'm not questioning his wisdom. I'm questioning the assumption in the first place that this is literally going to take place instead of having they call it spiritual application. Song of Solomon has spiritual application to a lot of people, and I think it's figurative language, but it's not dealing with the church. It's dealing with the relationship with husband and wife. You can't buy love. You can't force it. And the idea of that book's in our Bible to set forth that. But this temple and all of its worship is, to me, something that is indeed different. Now, look at this one. The land division, and I know our time is short, so if you can write those passages down, if we don't get through it, it'd be fine. It'd be helpful. Premillennialists believe that the Israel has never occupied the land that God promised Abraham. And we have that in Genesis, we have in Genesis 15, verse 18, where it's going to be from the Euphrates River onto the Red Sea. That's in Egypt. Where's the Euphrates? It's going around Babylon. And just so you could just see what that looks like, up here, you see the little red part? That's the land of Canaan in Jerusalem. Look how much it was promised to Abraham. Euphrates to around the Red Sea in this particular map. But coming right through Iraq, the Euphrates River is heading there. And that's what Genesis 15, 18, it says that. It sure does. It says that. But also want to be able to see that, read Exodus, the 23rd chapter. Let's get all of what God says upon a subject and realize that indeed what is he stating here? What does he state on this particular promise so we can include? Exodus 23 and verse 28. And I will send the hornet before thee, which shall drive out the Hivite, the Canaanite, and Hittite from before thee. So this one is going to be danger and cause fear. This hornet, as he personifies that. And I will drive them out, but I'll do it by little, verse 30. And then I will set my border, verse 31, from the Red Sea unto the sea of the Philistines. What's the sea of the Philistines? Mediterranean Sea, that's right. And from the wilderness unto the river. And what river is that? Euphrates. For I will deliver the inhabitants of the land of your land, and thou shalt drive them out before thee. So there's the promise. Now our question is, and let me just cut to the chase, because all these passages, here's the thought so we won't get stopped too quickly with the thought. Did Moses enter the promised land? You shake your head no, and I agree with that. But was there ever a doubt in your mind that he would ever enter the promised land? It's pretty clear. We know that he disobeyed God, and he didn't do that. So if the millennial is going to be the literal fulfillment of the land being, Moses, when he stood on the mountain looking into the promised land, he was in the promised land. Euphrates is further east than that. That's the promise given. Premillennialists, if indeed that's going to be the key, Genesis 15, 18, and these other passages, if that's the case, then they didn't, and you say they didn't ever inherit the land, what makes you so sure they're going to get it again? Because Moses was in the promised land. We say, oh, it never happened. Why is it? Because, see, here's the passages that Numbers 34 and Ezekiel 47 It's the same landmass that is promised. The landmass that was promised to the Israelites is the same landmass promised to the millennium, if we're going to look at it that way. So if they didn't receive that, what makes you think the same thing's going to be received now? They did receive that. Yet, look at these passages that I think we're more familiar with. Joshua, the 21st chapter, and I have a number of them here, but in Joshua, we'll find that God says, oh, we got all of it. That was all that was promised. Joshua 21 in verse 43, and Jehovah gave unto Israel all the land that he sware to give to their fathers. That would include Abraham, the promise to Abraham. And they possessed it and dwelt therein. Verse 45, there fell not all any good thing which Jehovah has spoken to the house of Israel, all came to pass. So now we've got there's that statement. Everything God promised, he fulfilled. Euphrates, Red Sea. And it's the same thing as we see in Joshua 23, verses 14 through 16. And behold, this day I'm coming this way of all the earth, and knowing all your hearts and all your souls, that one thing hath not failed thee, and all the good things which Jehovah God spake concerning you, they're come to pass. Not one thing is failed thereof. And it shall come to pass that all the good things that are come upon you, which Jehovah your God spake unto you, so will Jehovah bring upon you all the evil things that destroyed you from off this good land. So if they don't obey the commandments, it's going to happen. But they were given everything that God had promised. And so the question comes, how do these passages harmonize? And the only thing I can see here is that God did promise the Euphrates to them. But the land that they were going to possess was always going to be where they possessed it and they had it. The idea that Israel never possessed the land that they were promised. He gave them all that territory that said, this belongs to thee. But where they would dwell in Canaan was a limitation of where their land would be. That way, everything harmonizes. And everything, Moses didn't come into the land of Canaan. Look at or the promised land. Look at Deuteronomy. Let's finish this up. Here's Moses now, and where he's coming. He's on Mount Pisgah. That's within the Euphrates River and the Mediterranean Sea. And God says, I gave you all land, as promised. If that's the case, then he was in the promised land. And yet he was definitely told he would not do that. Deuteronomy 3 and verse 23. He says, I besought Jehovah at that time, saying, O Lord Jehovah, thou hast begun to show thy servant thy greatness. And he says, for what God is there in heaven and earth that I can do according to the works, according to thy mighty hand. Verse 26, but Jehovah was wroth with me for your sakes, and hearken not unto me. And Jehovah said to me, let it suffice thee, speak no more to me of this matter. Get thee up to the top of Mount Pisgah. Lift up thine eyes. He's standing in the promised land according to premillennialists. That was supposed to be given. Joshua said, and Moses said, we got it. Contradiction there. No, I want to harmonize that. And realize if that's the case, he's there now. And he says, you look eastward. See, that'd be looking back toward the Euphrates. But you look, lift up your eyes and look westward and northward and southward and eastward. And behold with thine eyes, for thou shalt not go over this Jordan. You're not going to go to the west. But charge Joshua and encourage him and strengthen him, for he shall go over before his people and shall cause them to inherit the land. Now, what do we see in Numbers, the 20th chapter? You're not going over, and we find why he didn't go over. Look at Numbers 20, verses 10 and 12. And Moses and Aaron gathered the assembly together before the rock and said to them, hear now, ye rebels, shall we bring forth water out of this rock? Well, he disobeyed God, didn't he? Because of that, in verse 12, Jehovah said unto Moses and Aaron, because ye believe not in me to sanctify me in the eyes of the children of Israel, therefore you shall not bring this assembly into the land which I had given them. Oh, if Genesis 15:18 is the land that you're going to get in the millennium, He was standing in it. And I know he wasn't. Because he wasn't going to be able to have, he wasn't even going to be able to lead his people into the land that was promised. What was promised was limited by what he had promised to Abraham. Not that they didn't have it. This is what you're going to possess. And all of these passages will harmonize. Finally, in Deuteronomy, the 31st chapter, we'll close with this. Moses went and spake these words unto all Israel. And he said, I am 120 years old. I can no more go in and out. And Jehovah has said to me, thou shalt not go over this Jordan. Jehovah thy God, he will go over before thee, and will destroy the nations that were before thee. And thou shalt dispossess them, and Joshua shall go over before me, and Joshua has spoken. And Jehovah will do unto them as he did unto Sihon and Og and the kings of the Amorites, unto the land whom he had destroyed. He's going over. God has promised the land, and they're going to be taking out those Canaanites a little bit at a time. But that's the land that they were to possess and live upon. Whether in this under a big picture of the land that he's willing to give to them. But the millenniums, it said that's when they're going to get the land that they never received before. What does the Bible say? Did they receive the land that was promised? Yeah, they did. And Moses, if that's not the case, Moses is standing on Mount Pisgah. It's part of the land that you say is promised. God said you're not going into that land. That means the land was limited for possession. Even though he's willing to give all of it, that was limited for possession. And they received it, and they possessed it. We could go a lot more about the prince, but I think that's enough. We're going to be starting, Lord willing, our next Wednesday class on the book of Numbers. We haven't studied that, and so there'll be material presented to that, but we're going to have an introductory lesson. So if you'll just come and you can read through there. A lot of more chapters we're looking at, but it's one book that we need to study. We've never studied that with these lessons, so we'll try to get that done next time. Any questions you want to ask or think about the book of Ezekiel? Remember, it's type of literature we see in the book of Revelation. The pictures of words give a concept, and I hope we've grasped it. And then our time's been well spent. Thank you.